A millionaire visits his sister's old mansion after 10 years of being empty. He suddenly hears a noise, not just one. His face paled as he walked in and saw. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a steel and glass jungle bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The hum of distant traffic rose and fell like the tide, punctuated by the occasional blare of a horn or the mechanical whir of elevators moving through the skyscraper. Inside Ellis & Company, Raymond Ellis sat at his expansive mahogany desk, absently flipping through a proposal he had already approved hours ago. The weight of the day pressed against his temples, but it wasn't the financial reports or the board meeting that clouded his mind. It was the date. The small numbers on his sleek digital clock read March 22nd, Rachel's birthday. He exhaled, leaning back in his leather chair, fingers tapping restlessly against the polished surface of his desk. The office was quiet now, save for the faint murmur of late-night workers in distant corridors, their footsteps echoing through the marble-floored lobby. His assistant, Olivia, a sharp and efficient woman in her early 40s, knocked lightly before stepping in. "You're still here," she noted, placing a thick manila folder onto his desk. "Finalized contracts for the Bennett acquisition. Needs your signature before tomorrow morning." Raymond barely glanced at it. "I'll get to it later." Olivia hesitated. After working with him for nearly a decade, she could read his moods better than most. "Is it?" He cut her off. "Just a long day." She didn't press, only nodding before stepping away. "Try to get some rest, Mr. Ellis." Rest, as if his mind would allow that. As soon as the door clicked shut behind her, he turned his chair, gazing out at the glittering city below. 10 years. 10 years since Rachel left. 10 years ago she had written to him, a letter, short and cold, announcing that she and John were leaving for France. She had insisted that he was never to touch her house, never to step foot in that old mansion on the outskirts of the city. It was hers, she had said, no matter where she went. Months later, another letter had arrived. This one sharper, final. She wanted nothing to do with the Ellis name, with their history, with him. He was the true heir, she claimed, while she was nothing. He had reached out, at first through letters that went unanswered, then emails that only ever received one-line responses, brief and formal. When he tried to visit her, she refused, making excuse after excuse. Until, finally, the silence between them grew into an impassable chasm, and just like that, his sister had vanished from his life. Yet, despite the years and the wounds between them, Raymond never forgot her birthday. Tonight, the memories pressed in with unrelenting clarity. Summers spent running through the fields behind their parents' estate, the air thick with the scent of sun-warmed grass and fresh rain. Evenings curled up by the fireplace, Rachel's laughter echoing off the grand wooden beams of the countryside mansion. Their mansion, or rather, Rachel's mansion. The thought pulled him forward, his fingers curling around the glass of whiskey on his desk. That old house had stood untouched for a decade, just as she had requested. He had stayed away, honoring her wishes, even as resentment festered beneath his skin. But why? Why had she been so adamant that he never set foot there? What was she so afraid he would find? The longer he thought about it, the more unsettling the silence became. The Ellis estate had belonged to their parents before their deaths, and when the will was read, one house for each child, Raymond inheriting the central Ellis manor, while Rachel had chosen the quiet countryside mansion. Back then, it made sense. Rachel always preferred solitude. She thrived in stillness, in the quiet beauty of things most people overlooked. But now, 10 years later, that house sat there empty, abandoned, just as she left it. She had never returned. A pulse of frustration throbbed beneath his skin. He had spent too long waiting for Rachel to explain herself, too long watching the only family he had left drift into the ether of the past. With slow deliberation, Raymond set his whiskey down, the decision forming as he stood. He was going to the mansion. For the first time in 10 years, he would step inside the house that had once been a part of them both. Rachel's warning be damned. The road leading to the mansion was narrower than Raymond remembered, winding through dense, untamed fields. The trees lining the dirt path stood gnarled and ancient, their branches stretching toward the sky like the fingers of some forgotten spectre. Shadows deepened as twilight thickened, and for a fleeting moment, Raymond considered turning back. He had spent a decade avoiding this place, obeying Rachel's last words as if they were law. Yet now, standing before the rusting wrought iron gate, he felt an odd detachment. The house was hers, but Rachel wasn't here. Had she ever truly been in France? The gates creaked as he pushed them open, the sound cutting through the stillness like a warning. Gravel crunched beneath his boots, the distant hoot of an owl, the only sign of life. And then, the house came into view. It loomed in the dying light, the once pristine stone walls now darkened by time and neglect. The grand arching windows reflected nothing but the emptiness within. It had not aged with grace. Vines had twisted themselves along the balcony railings, the porch sagged ever so slightly, and the front door, once polished mahogany, was dulled by the years. Raymond hesitated. For years, the mansion had been nothing but a memory, a ghost lingering at the edge of his consciousness. But standing here now, inhaling the scent of damp wood and overgrown earth, it felt as though the house itself was waiting, as though it had never truly been empty. He exhaled sharply and stepped inside. The moment the door shut behind him, the silence settled. Thick. Absolute. His footsteps echoed through the cavernous foyer, each step disturbing the dust that had settled over the years. The chandelier, once brilliant with cascading crystal, hung lifeless in the dim light. His fingers brushed against the wooden banister of the grand staircase, Rachel's favorite spot to sit when they were children, legs swinging over the side, narrating whatever book she was lost in. The air was heavy, as if it remembered something he had forgotten. Moving deeper inside, Raymond took in the frozen world around him. The furniture remained in place, covered in white sheets, their forms resembling shrouded figures standing vigil in the gloom. The fireplace in the sitting room held remnants of a fire long since turned to dust. No signs of looters, no vandalism, just stillness. His fingers tightened around his car keys. Why had Rachel insisted this place remain untouched? He passed the hallway mirror, pausing when his own reflection caught him off guard. A stranger in his own home. He studied his face, the sharp lines of age settling in places he hadn't noticed before. He turned away before he could linger too long. Rachel's room was at the end of the hall, the one place he had avoided since stepping inside. The door was slightly ajar, its hinges letting out a small groan as he pushed it open. It was exactly as she had left it. The bookshelves still held her novels, spines tilted at odd angles from where she used to pull them out carelessly. The writing desk by the window remained cluttered with yellowing papers and forgotten pens. A cup, now filled with nothing but dust, sat beside an unopened letter addressed to her. Everything here had been abandoned, yet there was no sign of haste. She had left this place deliberately, with precision, as if she had intended to return. Then he noticed it, the small key on the nightstand. He stared at it, unmoving. It was old, dull with tarnish, and felt out of place. His fingers closed around it, a quiet certainty settling in his chest. He knew where it belonged. The basement door stood near the main stairwell, tucked away in the shadows, its presence almost forgettable. Almost. He hadn't paid attention to it before, but now, standing before it with the key pressed between his fingers, something felt off. The handle was cold. Not the kind of cold from lack of use, but something deeper, something unnatural. He hesitated. His heartbeat picked up, not from fear, but from a primal instinct, a warning. The key slid into the lock. A soft click. Raymond's breath slowed. With a quiet exhale, he twisted the knob and pulled the door open. Darkness. The kind that seemed to absorb everything, swallowing the dim light from the hallway. A wave of damp, stale air rolled over him, thick with something he couldn't quite place. Something old. Something wrong. A single bulb hung above the staircase, its pull chain swaying slightly, as if recently disturbed. He reached out, fingers brushing the metal, and tugged. A dim, yellow light flickered to life. The basement stretched before him, in uneven stone steps, vanishing into the shadows below. He couldn't see the end of it. Not yet. He exhaled once, then started descending. 1 step, 2. The silence deepened. 3. The smell of mildew thickened. 4. And then, a sound. A rustling. Faint. Shallow. Breathing. Raymond stopped. His pulse pounded against his ribs. And for now, he realized, in this house, he was not alone. The breath was unmistakable, ragged, shallow, edged with fear. Raymond stood at the base of the stairs, his body tense, the dim light above him barely illuminating the stone walls. The air was thick, damp with something more than time, something human, something trapped. His eyes adjusted slowly. A shape curled into the farthest corner, small, motionless. A girl. She was barely more than a shadow against the crumbling bricks, her knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them, her head ducked low. Clothes torn, feet bare. Every inch of her was covered in grime, her skin streaked with dirt, her hair a tangled mess. And then she lifted her head, wide, hollow eyes locked onto his, too big, too empty, too afraid. Raymond swallowed hard. "What?" His voice barely carried in the heavy air. "Who are you?" She didn't move, didn't speak. Her fingers clenched around her own arms, the knuckles bone white beneath the filth. Bruises bloomed like ink beneath her skin. Old, faded, some not. A sick feeling curled in Raymond's stomach. She had been here for a while, a long while. He took a slow step forward. Her breath hitched. She flinched. Raymond froze. She was afraid of him, not just cautious, terrified. "No, no," he murmured, hands instinctively raising in surrender. "I'm not—" A sharp creak sounded from above. Footsteps. Raymond's entire body went rigid. Someone was here. A voice followed, casual, unhurried. "It's been a long time, Mr. Ellis." Raymond turned, already knowing who it was before his eyes found him. Victor Clark, a name from a past life. Raymond's mind scrambled for recognition, the face familiar but aged, features sharpened by time. It had been years since he'd last seen the old caretaker, and yet, standing here now, it felt as though no time had passed at all. Victor watched him closely, his lips pulling into something resembling a smile, though it never reached his eyes. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Raymond exhaled, his voice calm but edged. "Victor," he murmured, testing the name on his tongue, the weight of it settling into place. The old caretaker inclined his head, stepping forward with measured movements, his presence undisturbed by the scene before him. "I see you found Andrea." His voice was oddly casual, as if this were nothing more than an expected inconvenience. Raymond's gaze flickered back to the girl, still curled in the corner, motionless except for the slight, involuntary flinch at the sound of her name. Andrea. He turned back to Victor, his jaw tightening. "She—" He hesitated. What was she doing here? Why was she here? Victor exhaled lightly, almost amused. "She's my daughter." Raymond's stomach turned. The words felt wrong. Andrea did not look at him the way a child looks at a parent. There was no recognition, no trust, only fear. Victor took another step, his hands in his pockets, his posture carefully relaxed. "I've been taking care of this place for years now. Rachel arranged it before she left. 10 years ago, you remember?" A slow nod, calculated. He was gauging Raymond's reaction. Raymond kept his face neutral, though his mind churned. Rachel had arranged for Victor to stay. It didn't make sense. Rachel had been adamant that no one touched this house, that it remained as it was. She had been so possessive of it, and yet she had entrusted it to Victor. His gaze slid to Andrea again. The girl hadn't moved an inch. If possible, she had shrunken further into herself, the way her fear deepened. Victor noticed Raymond watching her and let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "She's not well," he said, stepping past Raymond like he wasn't even there. "Poor thing's been sick for a long time." Raymond stared. Victor crouched beside the girl, his hand moving toward her shoulder. She flinched so hard she nearly hit the wall. Raymond's stomach turned. "Let's not be rude, Andrea," Victor chided lightly, his voice coated with the kind of patience that felt practiced. "This is Mr. Ellis, the owner of this home. We should be grateful he's here." Andrea didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. Raymond's hands curled into fists. "You said she's sick," he said, voice steady. "What does she have?" Victor sighed, as if exhausted. "Does it matter? The girl barely leaves the basement. She doesn't do well outside." His tone was light, too light. A chill swept through Raymond's spine. "You keep her here?" he asked, a careful edge in his voice. Victor stood, brushing dust from his coat. "For her safety. She's delicate." He turned to face Raymond fully then, his gaze unwavering, quiet authority laced in every line of his expression. "You should leave," Victor said simply. Raymond's jaw tightened, the way he said it, not a threat, a command. And yet, Raymond's instincts screamed at him. Nothing about this was right. His gaze flickered to Andrea. She still hadn't moved. He exhaled slowly, forcing his pulse to steady. There was no point in challenging Victor now. He had nothing. No proof, no explanation. And Victor knew it. So Raymond did the only thing he could do. He nodded, turned, walked back up the stairs. His own footsteps felt too loud. The weight of the house, the air, the silence, it was pressing down on him, urging him to leave faster. Victor followed, his pace casual, but watchful. By the time they reached the main hall, the air had changed. The cold felt sharper, the shadows heavier. Victor moved toward the front door, pulling it open. "You take care now, Mr. Ellis." Raymond stepped outside, inhaling deeply. The night was colder now, the wind cutting through his coat, the distant hum of insects the only sound breaking the quiet. Victor leaned against the doorframe, waiting. Raymond hesitated. One last glance at the house. One last glance at the man standing between him and the truth. One last glance at the girl trapped below. Something inside him burned. A feeling, a certainty. This wasn't over, not even close. With a slow nod, Raymond turned and walked to his car. But as he pulled away from the mansion, his hands clenched around the steering wheel, jaw set tight. One thought echoed in his mind. Andrea wasn't sick. She was a prisoner, and he was going to find out why. The city never truly slept, but tonight, Raymond found himself awake for entirely different reasons. The dim glow of his bedside lamp flickered against the walls, casting restless shadows that mirrored the storm inside his mind. His fingers tapped idly against the glass of bourbon on the nightstand, untouched, its amber depths reflecting the thoughts swirling in his head. Andrea's face wouldn't leave him. Those hollow eyes, the bruises, the way she had flinched from Victor's touch as if it burned her. Raymond exhaled sharply, pressing the bridge of his nose between his fingers. This wasn't just wrong. It was sinister. Rachel had been adamant about no one touching the house, yet Victor had remained. She had never come back, never spoken of him. The letters, the sudden severance of their relationship, it all pointed to something deeper, something he had missed. His gaze flicked to his watch. 2:47 a.m. He wouldn't sleep tonight. A decision settled over him like stone. Tomorrow, he was going back. The next evening, the sky hung low with darkened clouds, smothering what little light remained. The road back to the mansion felt shorter this time, each mile swallowed beneath the weight of his purpose. Raymond didn't come empty-handed. A small bag sat on the passenger seat, filled with medical supplies, non-perishable food, and a bottle of water. He had considered bringing something more, a weapon maybe, but thought better of it. Not yet. The mansion stood as it had the night before, silent, waiting. This time he parked further away, tucking his car behind a stretch of trees. If Victor was home, he wasn't going to take chances. The gate groaned softly as he pushed it open, and Raymond moved quickly, slipping into the house with practiced ease. The scent of old wood and neglect hit him immediately, but he didn't pause. His steps were light, measured as he made his way toward the basement door. He barely hesitated before unlocking it. Andrea was still there, curled in the same corner, small and unmoving. But this time, her eyes widened at the sight of him. Not in fear, in something closer to disbelief. Raymond crouched, his movements slow, unthreatening. "I brought food," he murmured, placing the bag on the ground and pushing it toward her, "and something for the bruises." Andrea's gaze flickered to the bag, her fingers tightening around her own arms. "Go on," he coaxed gently. "It's safe." She hesitated. Then, for the first time, she moved, crawling forward, hands shaking as she reached into the bag. She pulled out a granola bar, unwrapped it with a desperate sort of urgency. She devoured it like a starving animal. Raymond swallowed against the sudden tightness in his throat. How long had she gone without real food? Silence stretched between them, save for the quiet rustling of wrappers. He let her eat and let her drink. Only when her breathing steadied, when some of the tension left her thin shoulders, did he speak. "How long have you been here?" Andrea didn't look at him, but he saw it, the slight tightening of her fingers, the way her throat bobbed when she swallowed. She didn't know how to answer. "You've never left, have you?" A small shake of her head. Raymond clenched his jaw. His worst fear had just been confirmed. "What about Victor?" His voice was careful now. "Does he hurt you?" She flinched before she could stop herself. That was all the answer he needed. Raymond forced his breath to remain steady. Stay calm. Keep her calm. "What about outside?" he asked. "Do you know what's out there?" Andrea's brow furrowed slightly. A flicker of something. Confusion. Then, softly, almost too quiet to hear, "I don't know." Raymond felt the world tilt beneath him. She wasn't just trapped, she had never been outside. His pulse pounded, his hands curled into fists. Victor had kept her like this, like an animal locked away, like something he owned. The urge to march upstairs and end this nearly overtook him, but then the sound of tires on gravel. Raymond froze. Andrea did too. Victor's car. Panic shot through him. He turned to Andrea, his voice urgent but quiet. "Listen to me. I need you to keep this a secret, okay? I promise I'll come back. But you can't tell him I was here." Andrea nodded quickly, her eyes wide again, but this time there was something else in them. Hope, a hope so small it nearly broke him. Raymond pulled away, his heart hammering. The only way out now was the window. His hands found the ledge, pushing him up. The wood groaned under his weight, but he was fast, silent. By the time Victor's car door slammed shut outside, Raymond had disappeared into the trees. But as he crouched in the darkness, watching the old man disappear into the house, one thing became painfully, unshakably clear. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. This was about saving that girl, and he would, no matter what it took. Raymond sat at his office desk, but he wasn't really there. The city stretched out behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, skyscrapers gleaming under the morning sun, streets humming with life, the steady current of commerce and ambition. It should have been a regular day, a board meeting at noon, a lunch with investors, a stack of contracts is waiting for his signature. But none of it mattered. His pen lay untouched. His laptop screen glowed with unread emails. A report sat open in front of him, its words a meaningless blur. His mind was elsewhere. Andrea. He couldn't shake her from his thoughts. The way she had devoured that granola bar like she had never eaten before. The bruises on her thin wrists. The way she had flinched when Victor entered the basement. The way she had whispered, "I don't know," when he had asked her if she had ever been outside. He hadn't slept much since that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her sitting there in the dark, alone, forgotten. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. The rain came in steady sheets against the city, tapping softly against the windows of Raymond's company. He stood at his desk, staring at the notes scattered before him, Rachel's old letters, printed emails, and property records. Each piece felt disconnected, yet instinct told him there was a pattern, something he wasn't seeing. He reached into the drawer of his desk, fingers brushing against the old leather of a photo album. He pulled it out, flipping through the pages until he found what he was looking for, a picture of him and Rachel, barely 10 years old, standing in front of the mansion. Rachel had her arm looped through his, her hair loose and wild, a bright smile on her face. He had always thought of her like that, full of life, warm, unbreakable. So why had she left everything behind? Had she even left at all? He tapped a number into his phone and lifted it to his ear. "David," he said when the line clicked, "I need you to look into someone for me." There was a pause, then, "Send me the details." Raymond exhaled. "And one more thing. Rachel, my younger sister. I need to know if she ever actually left for France." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Understood. Give me a day." David was efficient, thorough, and discreet, one of the best private investigators in the city. By the time they met at a quiet bar that evening, he already had a folder waiting for Raymond. "You were right to be suspicious," David said, sliding the folder across the table. "Victor Clark isn't just some caretaker. There's more to him than he lets on." Raymond didn't hesitate. He opened the folder immediately. Inside were printed documents, photos, and old newspaper clippings. The first was a photo of Victor, much younger, standing beside Rachel. His gaze was off. Not just admiration, obsession. Raymond's jaw tightened. "What did you find?" David exhaled, taking a sip of his drink before continuing. Victor worked for the Ellis family for decades, but his loyalty wasn't to the estate. It was to Rachel. Raymond's fingers tightened around the papers. "Rachel and John left for France," he murmured. "Did they actually go?" David shook his head. No confirmed records of them ever arriving there. No immigration logs, no bank transactions. It's like they just vanished. A slow, heavy silence settled between them. Raymond's stomach twisted. "And Andrea?" he asked. David flipped another page in the file. "That's where it gets strange." He tapped a document, an old census record. Andrea wasn't listed anywhere. No birth certificate, no school records, no medical history. Raymond's breath caught. "She doesn't exist?" David's expression was grim. "As far as the world is concerned, no." Something cold curled in Raymond's chest. "She showed up at the mansion right after Rachel left," David added. "There's no trace of her before that." Raymond closed his eyes, exhaling slowly through his nose. Victor. It all led back to him. A man obsessed with Rachel, a girl who had never been outside, a basement that felt more like a prison than a home. He looked at the last picture in the folder, the mansion, a grainy image taken from a distance, the lights inside dim and unnatural. "Something happened in that house," Raymond said quietly, "and I need to know what." David studied him carefully. "What are you thinking?" Raymond didn't hesitate. "I'm going back." David exhaled sharply, leaning back in his seat. "Ray, I need to see for myself. You do realize if Victor catches you snooping around, things could get ugly." Raymond's gaze was steady, unwavering. "I don't care." David was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," he said, voice low. "Then we do this right." Raymond met his eyes. They weren't just searching for the truth anymore. They were preparing for war. The wind howled against the mansion's towering walls, rattling the old window panes. The night stretched deep and unforgiving, swallowing the estate into the darkness as if it had never existed. The house had always felt large, but tonight it felt endless. Raymond pressed his back against the cold stone wall of the mansion's side entrance, inhaling deeply. His heart pounded in a steady rhythm, not from fear, but from certainty. He had spent years running from this house, pushing its ghosts to the edges of his mind, but now he was walking back into its shadows, determined to pull the truth into the light. David crouched beside him, his breath visible in the cold night air. "One last chance to walk away," he murmured. Raymond didn't respond. He had made his decision the moment Andrea's hollow eyes had met his. David sighed and nodded. "All right, let's move." Inside, the mansion felt more alive than it had in years. Not with warmth, not with memories, but with something lurking beneath the surface. As if the house itself knew they were there, searching for answers it had buried long ago. Raymond led the way up the grand staircase, his footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust coating the floor. Every turn, every shadow felt like a reminder of what this house had been before Rachel disappeared, before Victor had turned it into something else. They reached Rachel's room. The door groaned as it swung open, the scent of old paper and faded perfume clinging to the air. Nothing had changed since the last time Raymond had stood here, yet the room felt different now, like it was waiting for him to find something. David flicked on a flashlight, the beam cutting through the dust swirling in the air. "Where do we start?" Raymond exhaled, running a hand over the wooden desk near the window. This had been Rachel's space, where she had written letters, read novels, sketched her thoughts in the margins of forgotten pages. If there was something hidden here, it would be personal. He began pulling open drawers, carefully sifting through old papers, journals filled with childhood dreams, and letters from people she no longer spoke to. Nothing seemed out of place. Then David spoke. "Ray." Raymond turned. David stood by the bookshelf, his hand resting against the worn wooden frame. "The dust is disturbed here, recently." Raymond stepped forward, studying the shelf. It was filled with books Rachel had adored, classic literature, poetry collections, and old philosophy texts. His fingers traced the spines, pausing on one that didn't seem to belong. It wasn't a novel. It was a file folder, tucked neatly between the books. He pulled it free, his breath hitching as he flipped it open. Emails, printed copies of emails, all from Rachel's account. But they weren't written like Rachel. Raymond scanned them, his hands tightening around the pages. They were stiff, formal, sent in broken intervals over the years. But the tone was wrong. "This isn't her," he murmured. David leaned over his shoulder. "You're sure?" "I know how my sister writes." Raymond's voice was tight. "These are cold, empty. Rachel wouldn't have written like this." He turned the page, his eyes locked onto the sender address. A message from Rachel's email, but it hadn't been sent from France. It had been sent from this house. Raymond didn't have time to process it before David spoke again. "There's more." Raymond followed his gaze. David had moved to the dresser, the top drawer slightly ajar. Inside were stacks of old bills, electric, water and property taxes, all in Rachel's name, all recent. Raymond felt his stomach drop. "Was she still paying for this house?" David murmured. She was supposed to be gone. David's expression was grim. Then why are there transactions from just a few years ago? Raymond didn't answer. He didn't need to. Rachel hadn't left, at least not willingly. His hands were trembling as he reached for the last piece of evidence, the bottom drawer of the desk, locked. Rachel had never locked her drawers. David didn't hesitate. He pulled out a thin metal tool, working the lock with quiet efficiency. It clicked open in seconds. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook. Raymond flipped it open. The first page was familiar, Rachel's handwriting, slanted, fluid, the way she had always written. But as he turned the pages, the ink changed. The words shifted. Halfway through the book, the handwriting was no longer hers. It was Victor's. Raymond's stomach churned. He didn't want to read it, but he did, and what he found made his blood run cold. Then, from downstairs, a voice, raised, angry, "Victor." Raymond's body went rigid, heart hammering, and then a sound that shattered something inside him, a sharp cry. "Andrea." Raymond moved instantly, his muscles tensing to launch himself forward, but David caught his arm. "Not yet," David whispered urgently. "We need more than suspicion. If you go now, he'll know. We need proof." Raymond clenched his fists, his breath ragged with fury. Downstairs, Victor's voice boomed through the house, followed by the sound of something hitting the floor. Raymond's vision blurred with anger. Andrea was down there, alone. And yet, David was right. If they acted too soon, if they made a move without proof, Victor could slip through the cracks. He could take Andrea somewhere else. Raymond swallowed hard, forcing himself to take a step back, then another. Every part of him screamed to run downstairs, to tear Victor apart, but instead he nodded to David. "Then we get the proof," he whispered. His hands trembled at his sides, but his mind was clear. Victor had stolen his sister. Now Raymond was going to steal back the truth, and he was going to end this. What follows will leave you horrified and outraged. Comment "noodles" if you're ready to listen. Raymond returned home with the same heavy heart he had when he received Rachel's letter of separation 10 years ago. The room seemed to shrink around Raymond as he flipped through the brittle pages of the leather-bound journal. His fingers trembled, the dim glow of the flashlight casting sharp shadows against the ink-stained paper. Rachel's handwriting had always been distinctive, neat, slanted, full of quiet elegance. The first few entries bore the familiar flow of her words, dated shortly after she had supposedly moved to France. But then, the ink changed. The words became more erratic, the letters jagged, as if written by an unsteady hand. And then, halfway through, it wasn't her writing at all. It was Victor's. Raymond's breath slowed, his body cold despite the weight of his coat. The words before him burned into his mind, each sentence chipping away at the walls he had built around the past. April 17th, 10 years ago. John left for a business trip today. He kissed me goodbye and said he'd be back in a week. I watched him drive away from the window, and I don't know why, but I felt uneasy. I haven't been able to shake this feeling all day. Victor has been strange lately, always watching, always lingering. I told John before he left, and he laughed it off. "He's loyal," John said. "That's all." I should have told him I was afraid. April 18th. I don't know how to write this. I can barely hold the pen. I need to stay awake. I can't let myself sleep. I don't know what he'll do if I sleep. Victor came into my room last night. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to touch me. But he did. I screamed. No one heard. I fought. It didn't matter. I don't know what to do. Raymond's fingers curled around the edges of the journal, his breath sharp, his vision blurring. His pulse hammered in his ears, drowning out the distant creaks of the old house, drowning out everything except the words in front of him. He turned the page. April 19th. I tried to run, He caught me. He locked the doors. He took my phone. He took everything. John, where are you? Ray, can you hear me? April 23rd. I begged him to let me go. I told him I wouldn't tell anyone. He just smiled. You belong here, Rachel. I hate him. I hate him. I hate him. April 25th. John is dead. I don't know how to write those words. I don't know how to breathe past them. He came back early. I don't know what happened. I heard voices, a struggle, and then silence. Victor wouldn't tell me where John was. He only said, "He won't be coming back." I screamed until my throat bled. No one came. May 3rd, Victor says I need to write to Ray. Tell him I'm happy in France. I don't want to do it. I don't. May 7th. He says if I don't write, he'll make me regret it. He says Ray doesn't need me. I know it's a lie. I know. May 14th, I wrote the letter. I didn't have a choice. Ray, if you ever see this, I never left you. I never left. Raymond's hands clenched so tightly around the journal that the pages crumpled beneath his grip. He had believed it. For 10 years, he had believed it. He had thought she abandoned him. He had thought she left without looking back. But she had been here. She had been trapped in this house, screaming for help he never came to give. The air around him thickened, suffocating. His throat burned, his chest constricting with a fury so raw it felt like his ribs might shatter under the pressure. She was still alive, he whispered, voice hoarse. David, standing beside him, had gone pale. He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face before nodding toward the final pages. Ray, keep reading. Raymond forced himself to turn the page. And then he saw it, the last entry in Rachel's handwriting. November 9th. It's happening. I don't know how to stop it. Something is wrong. I've been sick for weeks. Victor says I should be grateful, that I should love this, but I don't. I want to die. I miss you, Ray. I miss the summers. I miss the sun. I miss feeling like I exist. I'm sorry. The ink stopped. Rachel's words ended here. The next page. Victor's handwriting. Raymond hesitated before reading. His breath shook. November 10th. Rachel is gone, right after giving birth to Andrea. She left me. She left Andrea. I told her we were meant to be a family. She didn't understand. She never understood. But Andrea is here. Andrea will stay. She will learn. She will never leave me like Rachel did. The book slipped from Raymond's fingers, landing with a dull thud against the wooden floor. His stomach lurched. His hands trembled as a sound clawed its way up his throat, a low, ragged exhale, thick with rage, thick with grief. Rachel hadn't just been trapped. She had been raped. She had been forced to bear his child, and she had died alone in this house. Victor had taken everything. Raymond's body shook with the weight of the truth. The guilt was unbearable. He had spent a decade believing Rachel had abandoned him, when in reality she had been fighting until she had nothing left to give. And when she was gone, Victor had kept her child. He had taken Andrea and twisted the truth. Raymond's breathing was uneven, his fists clenching so hard that his nails bit into his palms. He could hear David speaking, but the words blurred into a distant hum. Only one thought cut through the storm inside him. I let this happen. I believed the lie. I left her here. A voice echoed in the back of his mind, Rachel's voice from the journal. Ray, can you hear me? His vision blurred, but when he blinked, the grief turned to something sharper. Rage. He hadn't heard her then, but he heard her now. Rachel was gone. He could never fix that. But Andrea was still here, and Victor was still breathing. Not for long. I'll kill him, Raymond whispered. The storm inside Raymond hadn't settled. Never. Not after reading Rachel's last words. Not after seeing Victor's deranged confession. Not after realizing he had spent a decade believing a lie while his sister had been imprisoned. pleading for help he never came to give. The guilt was unbearable, but rage burned stronger, and now it was time to act. David leaned against Raymond's desk, arms crossed, watching him with careful calculation. "We need to be smart about this, Ray," he said. "We go in too fast, Victor disappears. You know what men like him do when they feel cornered?" Raymond's jaw tightened. "I won't let him run. I know." David exhaled. "That's why we're going to make sure he doesn't see it coming." He tossed a single sheet of paper onto the desk, a fake letter from the bank, stamped with official insignia. "Victor's been using Rachel's accounts to keep the house running," David explained. "If we make him believe the bank found inconsistencies in the ownership, he'll panic. He'll go in person to defend himself." Raymond picked up the letter, reading the forged details. A request for an urgent financial review. A time-sensitive issue requiring immediate attention. David smirked. Victor's pride won't let him ignore this. He thinks he owns that house, that he's in control. If there's a threat to that, he'll act. Raymond exhaled slowly. "And when he does, we get Andrea out." The next morning, the letter was delivered by courier. By afternoon, they had their answer. Victor took the bait. Through a pair of binoculars, Raymond watched as Victor left the mansion, his figure retreating down the long, cracked driveway toward his aging sedan. His departure was hurried, agitated. "Good." David turned to Raymond. "We don't have much time. Let's move." The house was colder than before. Raymond barely noticed. His body was running on something fiercer than adrenaline, something deeper than instinct. He moved through the halls without hesitation, his feet carrying him to the basement door like he had lived this moment 1,000 times before. The lock clicked open with an eerie ease. The darkness inside the basement was absolute, a thick, suffocating void swallowing everything within. But Raymond didn't hesitate. He stepped inside. "Andrea." His voice was urgent but gentle, controlled but shaking. A rustling noise came from the farthest corner. Then, a pair of wide, terrified eyes caught the dim light. She was exactly where he had left her. But this time, she wasn't just afraid. This time, there was something else in her expression. Hope. "We're leaving," Raymond said, firm but kind. Andrea flinched, her arms wrapped around herself, her small fingers gripping her tattered sleeves. Victor isn't here," Raymond interrupted. "You don't have to stay. You don't have to be afraid anymore." She hesitated. She didn't understand. The only world she had ever known was this basement. Raymond knelt in front of her, softening his voice. "Andrea," he whispered, "I knew your mother." Her lips parted slightly, a sharp, silent breath sucked inward. Raymond reached into his pocket and pulled out the old photo of Rachel, the one where she was smiling, free, the sun warming her face. He held it up. "She was my sister," he said. His voice cracked, but he pushed through it. "And she fought for you." Andrea stared, wide-eyed, unblinking, unmoving. Then, her gaze dropped to the photo. For the longest time, she didn't breathe. Then, her small fingers reached out, touched the worn edges, traced Rachel's face. Raymond swallowed, trying to fight back the grief swelling in his throat. "She wanted you to be safe, Andrea," he murmured, "and I'm here to make sure that happens." A tear rolled down her cheek, but this time she didn't wipe it away. She just nodded. Raymond held out his hand, and this time, she took it. The moment they stepped outside, Andrea froze. The wind hit her first, soft but sharp, cold but refreshing. She sucked in a breath, her head snapping upward, her fingers tightening around Raymond's hand. She blinked at the sky, so vast, so open, like she had never seen anything like it before. She hadn't. Her small chest rose and fell quickly, her body overwhelmed by the sheer expanse of the world. The trees moved, their leaves whispering, their branches swaying gently. She stared at them, watching the way they danced in the wind. She lifted her free hand, reaching toward the sky, toward the sun, as if trying to touch it. Raymond felt something crack inside him. She had been buried underground for her entire life. She had never seen the sky, never felt the air, never known she was part of something bigger than that house, than that basement, than Victor's control. And now, she was free. A quiet sound left her lips, half a sob, half a laugh, as she took another step forward. She was shaking, but she wasn't stopping. She was seeing, and Raymond knew, in that moment, Rachel had won. Even in death, she had won. A car sped down the road in the distance. Raymond's pulse jumped. Victor. He wasn't supposed to be back so soon. Raymond turned to David, his mind already racing. "We have to move. Now." David was already ahead of him, sprinting toward the car they had hidden at the edge of the property. Raymond scooped Andrea into his arms, her small body light as air, trembling, but trusting. For the first time in 10 years, Raymond was leaving this house with someone he loved. For the first time in her life, Andrea was leaving this house at all. And they weren't going back. Victor came back from the bank. They said there was no report. He thought someone was plotting and rushed home. His little cat had to be there. Victor threw open the door and screamed, "Andrea!" The rooms, the hallways. Empty. The chains were open. The windows were broken. Andrea. Once again, the silence in the mansion was no different from usual, but Victor's cold eyes almost burned everything. It's those men around Rachel again, he thought. Raymond Ellis. Don't blame each other. The knock came at midnight. Not hesitant, not cautious, furious. Raymond had been expecting it. Andrea was asleep upstairs, curled into a nest of blankets, the first real bed she had ever known. She had barely spoken since they left the mansion, still processing the overwhelming reality of the world outside. He hadn't pushed her, not yet. But now, there was no more time. Raymond set his glass down, the amber liquid inside untouched. His hands were steady as he moved toward the door. He knew who it was. He opened it. And there, standing on the porch, was Victor Clark. His coat was damp from the rain, his face gaunt, stretched too tight over sharp bones. But his eyes, they burned, wild and unhinged. "You took her," Victor hissed, stepping forward, his presence wrong, suffocating. "Give her back." Raymond didn't move. "She was never yours." Victor's lips curled. "You don't understand," he spat. "She's my daughter, mine." The words sent a wave of sickness through Raymond's body. "She was Rachel's daughter," Raymond said, his voice low, controlled, deadly. "And you stole her." Victor's expression twisted, something dark bubbling just beneath the surface. He laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. "Stole her?" His voice dropped into a whisper, venomous. "I gave her life." Raymond's stomach churned. Victor stepped closer. "Rachel never loved me." "But Andrea," he exhaled sharply, his fingers twitching at his sides. "Andrea is mine." "She was never yours." Raymond's voice was ice. "She was never Rachel's choice. She was your crime." Something in Victor snapped. His hand shot forward, grabbing Raymond by the collar, his grip tight, unrelenting. His breath was hot and rancid against Raymond's face. "You don't get to decide that," Victor whispered. Raymond's fist slammed into his jaw. Victor staggered back, but he was fast. Too fast. Before Raymond could move, a blade gleamed in the dim light. A knife. Raymond barely had time to react before Victor lunged. Pain seared through his side, sharp, hot, real. He gasped, stumbling back, but he didn't fall. Victor was panting, eyes crazed. Raymond pressed a hand to his side. Blood, warm and sticky between his fingers. Victor smiled. "She was never yours to save," he whispered. "Stop." Both men froze, Andrea stood at the top of the staircase, her small frame silhouetted by the dim hallway light. Her hands were clenched into fists, her shoulders shaking. But her eyes, they weren't afraid, not anymore. Victor's smile twisted into something sickeningly sweet. "There you are," he cooed. "Come here, darling. Let's go home." Andrea didn't move. "I don't have a home," she whispered. Victor's smile flickered. "Andrea, you killed my mother. Raymond told me everything. You're a monster." The room went silent. Victor stilled, his fingers tightening around the knife. Raymond could hear the rain outside, the distant hum of the city. But in this moment, everything narrowed down to Andrea and the monster before her. "I know what you did," Andrea continued, her voice small but steady. "I know everything." Victor's breath hitched. "You lied to me," she whispered. "You said she left me." Raymond watched as something broke inside Victor, a fracture in the foundation of his delusion. "She did," Victor snapped, his voice cracking. She died." Andrea's voice was calm, certain. "Because of you." Victor shook his head. No, you don't understand." His breathing turned erratic, his body trembling as he turned to Raymond. "This is your fault," he spat. "If you had stayed away." Andrea stepped forward. Victor flinched. She looked at him, really looked at him, and she wasn't afraid anymore. "You can't hurt me," she whispered. "Not any more." Victor snarled. "You ungrateful little—" The front door burst open. David, and behind him, the police. Victor barely had time to turn before he was tackled to the ground, the knife clattering from his hand. Raymond staggered back, his vision swimming. He pressed a hand tighter against his wound, sucking in a sharp breath as the room swarmed with officers. Victor screamed, his body thrashing as they pinned him down. "She's mine! You can't take her from me! She's mine!" Andrea watched, her expression unreadable. Then, quietly, she turned away. Raymond saw the moment it hit her. She was free. The sirens had faded. The house was silent once more. Raymond sat on the couch, the wound on his side bandaged, sore but stable. He wasn't worried about himself. His eyes were on Andrea. She sat on the far end of the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket, her knees pulled to her chest. For the first time, she looked small, lost, but not broken. Raymond leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Are you okay?" Andrea hesitated, then nodded. She wasn't. Not yet. But she would be. Raymond took a slow breath. "There's something you should know." Andrea's gaze flickered to him. "Victor wasn't your father," he said gently. "He never was." Andrea's lips parted slightly. Raymond swallowed. "Your mother, Rachel, she loved you. She never wanted to leave you. She fought for you, until the very end." Andrea's breath hitched. Raymond pulled out the photo of Rachel again. He held it out. Andrea took it this time, staring at it for a long, long time. Then, her shoulders shook. A tear fell onto the photo. Raymond didn't move, didn't speak. He just let her cry. Because for the first time in her life, she was safe enough to do it. The courtroom was silent. The air was thick with judgment, with finality, with justice finally catching up to Victor Clark. He sat at the defendant's table, his hands cuffed, his face paler than Raymond had ever seen it. There was no rage today, no snarling, no delusions of power. Just a man who had been exposed for what he was, a monster, with nowhere left to run. Andrea sat beside Raymond, her small hands balled into fists in her lap. She hadn't said much since the night of the confrontation, but she was here, and she was watching. The judge read the charges one by one: kidnapping, false imprisonment, child abuse, sexual assault, and the murder of John Ellis. Every word struck like a hammer, and when the sentence came, life without parole, the tension in Raymond's chest finally loosened. It was over. Victor didn't fight it. He didn't lash out, didn't scream as they dragged him away. But before they took him through the door, he turned. His eyes locked onto Andrea, and for a moment, he smiled. Raymond felt her stiffen beside him. Victor's lips parted, but no words came. Then he was gone. And he would never come back. They found him in his cell 2 days later, hanging, a bedsheet tied to the overhead pipe. Victor Clark had taken the only escape left to him. Raymond wasn't surprised. Men like him never faced the consequences of their actions. They ran, even in the end. When he told Andrea, she didn't react at first. Then, after a long silence, she simply asked, "What happens now?" Raymond didn't know how to answer, until he did. The mansion stood just as they had left it, a hollow shell of horrors, a graveyard of stolen lives. Raymond stared at it from the distance, Andrea standing beside him. "This place," she murmured, voice small. "It doesn't feel real." Raymond nodded. "It's not," he said. "Not anymore." The demolition crew was ready. Raymond had fought for it. He had bought the land, pushed for the permits, made sure no one could ever touch this house again. There would be no shrine to Victor, no remnants of the prison he built. Andrea watched as the first wrecking ball swung forward, slamming into the rotting wood and stone. Dust and debris rose like smoke, filling the sky, erasing everything Victor had left behind. Raymond watched Andrea closely, and when she finally exhaled, a long, deep breath, he saw the moment she let go. They turned away together, leaving the past to crumble behind them. A month later, Raymond stood in a lawyer's office, a single sheet of paper before him. Andrea sat beside him, her fingers gripping the chair's arms tightly. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. She hesitated. Then, for the first time, she smiled. "Yes." Raymond picked up the pen and signed his name. Andrea did the same. The lawyer nodded. "It's official," he said. "Congratulations, Mr. Ellis. Andrea is now legally your daughter." Raymond turned to her. She looked at him, not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with trust, and that was worth everything. That night, Andrea stood at the edge of the porch, looking up at the sky. She had been doing that a lot, watching the world she had never known existed. Raymond stepped beside her. "What are you thinking?" She took a deep breath. "I feel free," she said. She looked at him. "Thank you." Raymond swallowed past the lump in his throat. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "Your family. You always were." Andrea's eyes glistened, but this time her tears weren't from pain. They were from something else, something like hope. She reached out first, and Raymond barely had time to react before she wrapped her arms around him. He hugged her back tightly, holding her like she was something precious. Because she was. And for the first time in 10 years, Raymond had his family again. Not the same, but whole. And that was enough. Healing wasn't instant. It wasn't easy. Andrea didn't wake up one morning suddenly free of the years she had spent in darkness. The ghosts of the past clung to her in ways neither of them fully understood. But she was trying, and so was Raymond. The house was quiet, the early morning sunlight stretching across the floorboards. In the kitchen, Raymond watched as Andrea stared at the bowl of cereal in front of her, shifting the spoon in her hands. She had never poured her own milk before, such a simple thing, something most children took for granted. But for Andrea, every experience was new, untested, uncertain. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the spoon. She hesitated. Raymond didn't rush her. After a long pause, she took the first bite. She chewed slowly, as if memorizing the sensation. Then, after another long pause, she took a second bite. Raymond let out a quiet breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was small, insignificant to the rest of the world. But to her, it was everything. A few weeks later, Raymond came home with a small, furry creature curled up in his arms. Andrea stared at the tiny golden retriever puppy with cautious disbelief. "You got a dog," she said, as if the words themselves didn't make sense. "I did," Raymond replied casually. "For you." Andrea's brow furrowed, like she was processing a complicated equation. Raymond crouched down beside her, letting the puppy wiggle its way into her space. Its soft brown eyes blinked up at her, its tail wagging so hard its tiny body nearly tipped over. Andrea didn't move. Raymond had learned by now. She needed time. The puppy, however, did not understand this. It lunged forward, paws colliding against Andrea's lap, tongue flicking out to lick her cheek. She flinched at first, then froze completely. Raymond waited. Andrea's hand lifted, slowly, tentatively. Her fingers brushed against the puppy's fur. The puppy whined happily. Something shifted in Andrea's face. Her lips parted slightly, her chest rising and falling in quick, uneven breaths. Then, for the first time since she had left the mansion, she laughed. It was quiet, breathless, but real. And Raymond thought, this is what Rachel would have wanted. When Andrea's birthday came, she didn't know what to do with it. "I never had a birthday before," she admitted softly, standing in front of the cake Raymond had set on the table. It wasn't extravagant, just a simple vanilla cake with blue frosting. But to her it might as well have been something impossible, untouchable. David and a few of Raymond's closest friends were there, but all eyes were on Andrea. The candles flickered. Andrea stared at them, her hands twisting in her lap. "Go ahead," Raymond encouraged gently. "Make a wish." She hesitated. Then, slowly, carefully, she closed her eyes. And when she blew out the candles, the flames flickered and died. A new beginning. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, the waves rolling in slow, steady rhythms. Andrea stood at the water's edge, her bare feet sinking into the cool sand, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched the waves. Raymond stood beside her, silent. She had asked to come here. After months of learning, growing, healing, she had woken up one morning and simply said she wanted to see the ocean. Now, as she stood there, taking in the vastness of it all, Raymond could see the way her chest rose and fell with a steady, unshaken breath. No fear, no hesitation, just wonder. "The sky," she whispered, lifting her hand toward the horizon. "It never ends." Raymond smiled, following her gaze. "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." Andrea looked at him, the wind lifting her hair, the salt air kissing her cheeks. "Neither do I," she said softly. Raymond swallowed, his throat tight with emotion. She had lived in a cage for so long. But now, she had a future, and it was limitless. Andrea turned back to the ocean. Then, without warning, without fear, she ran forward. Her feet splashed into the water, her laughter echoing against the sky. Raymond didn't stop her, because for the first time, she was truly free, and that was all that mattered. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values yet entertaining. See you there.